A piercing pain throbbed in Silas's head as consciousness slowly returned to him. He peeled his eyelids open with great effort, wincing at the ache behind his eyes. As his vision adjusted to the dim lighting, he realized he was sprawled on his back atop a cold stone floor. Strange, he didn't remember going to sleep here. Groaning, Silas forced himself up to a sitting position, blinking hard to clear his hazy vision. He appeared to be in some kind of circular chamber, the curved stone walls interrupted only by torches ensconced at regular intervals. Their flames cast flickering shadows that danced across the floor and walls. As Silas's eyes followed the curvature of the chamber wall, his breath caught in his throat. Surrounding him in a perfect ring were 13 doors, each set into an archway carved from aged, dark wood. Above each door hung an ornate wrought iron candle holder, a fat pillar candle within that provided additional light. 12 of the doors had antique clocks mounted just above them, their brass faces tarnished but still gleaming in the firelight. The hour hands pointed to numbers from 1 to 12 in Roman numerals, as if marking a path around the circumference of the chamber. Oddly, the 13th door stood apart from the others, completely unadorned and unlabeled. Its presence exuded a foreboding energy that made the fine hairs on Silas's neck stand on end. Silas pressed his palms to his throbbing temples, trying to piece together how he came to be in this inexplicable chamber that felt torn from a past century. His mind felt foggy, memories jumbled and indistinct. He focused hard, grasping at the last clear thought he could recall. That's right. He had been driving home late at night after working overtime at the office. Exhausted but looking forward to collapsing into bed, anxious to put a long week behind him. He remembered the road was slick with recent rain, the pavement shimmering under the streetlights. The digital clock on his dashboard had just flipped to midnight when suddenly a pair of blinding headlights appeared in his rearview mirror, bearing down on him with terrible speed. Before Silas could react, his world exploded into screeching metal and shattering glass as the vehicles collided. After that, nothing. Just darkness. Cold understanding washed over Silas as the memory came into terrible focus. Today was Friday the 13th, and he had been in a horrific car accident. But if this place was the afterlife, then what was its purpose? Some sort of purgatory or waiting room before whatever lay beyond? A crumpled piece of paper clenched in Silas's fist caught his attention. He unfolded it to reveal a message scribbled in an unsteady, spidery hand. Confront your fears to find the way out. Silas felt his blood turn to ice in his veins. His way out of here? Did that mean there was a path back to the world of the living, or was his fate bound to this strange realm? Regardless, he did not like the cryptic implication that he would have to face unknown fears in order to progress. But it seemed answers would only come from venturing beyond one of the 13 doors surrounding him. Steeling himself, Silas rose unsteadily to his feet. There was only one way to move forward now. Silas's eyes were drawn to the small wooden door marked with a 1, as if compelled by some unseen force. He slowly approached, his footsteps echoing eerily against the stone floor. Up close, Silas could see the door was carved from heavy oak, darkened with age. The brass handle felt icy cold under his grip as he turned it with trembling hands. The door swung open, and Silas cried out as he was instantly engulfed by impenetrable darkness. The door slammed shut behind him, severing his view of the circular chamber. Silas's breath came in panicked gasps, his eyes straining but unable to penetrate the void. Then, faintly, Silas heard it. The slow, haunting melody of a lullaby drifted through the darkness. His blood turned to ice. He knew that song. It was the one his mother used to sing to him at bedtime as a child, but he hadn't heard it since. Like a curtain being drawn back, the darkness receded. Silas found himself standing in his childhood bedroom. Moonlight filtered through the window, illuminating the familiar rocket ship bed covers and shelves lined with favorite toys. But rather than feeling comforted by the familiar surroundings, Silas felt only mounting dread. From under the bed came a sinister scuttling and scraping, the noises that had tormented his nights as a child, which he had attributed to the monsters he imagined lurking just out of sight. As the sinister sounds continued, cold fear constricted Silas's chest. He had to get out of there. Silas fled from the room back into the central chamber, his heart pounding. But this was only the first in the series of numbered doors. Steeling himself, Silas moved to the next door marked with a 2. This time, he found himself transported to the neighborhood park he had played at growing up. The swings and slides sat empty, except for one swing, which held a figure Silas hoped never to see again. It was Malcolm, the imaginary friend Silas had dreamt up as a lonely child without siblings. Only Malcolm had turned cruel over time, mocking and belittling Silas until he had banished the friend from his mind. But here he sat, flesh and blood, with a malevolent grin that chilled Silas to his core. Doors 3 and 4 continued the relentless assault on Silas's childhood psyche. Door 3 opened to the dark forest behind his childhood home, the crooked bare branches clawing at him like gnarled fingers. Dr. 4 revealed his grandmother's attic, filled with eerie mannequins and shadows that had haunted his youthful nights spent there. Each scenario forced Silas to confront suppressed fears from his past that he thought had been left behind. But this strange purgatory seemed intent on dredging up those buried phantoms, perhaps as a test of his courage. Jaw clenched, Silas carried on, determined to see this trial through to the end. Silas hesitated outside the oak door marked with a 5, readying himself for whatever lay beyond. He turned the handle and was momentarily blinded as he emerged into a bustling high school hallway. Lockers lined the walls, packed with chattering students killing time before next period. At first, Silas thought he had simply been transported back to his own high school days. But as his eyes adjusted to the scene, his stomach dropped. This wasn't just any school. It was his old high school. And the students weren't just any students. He recognized faces of former classmates he hadn't seen in over a decade. This was neither a dream nor a memory. Somehow, Silas had been plunged back to the most awkward, painful time of his adolescence. He instantly felt self-conscious, acutely aware of his adult body squeezing through throngs of teenagers. A bell rang, and the students began spilling into classrooms along the hall. As Silas scanned the room numbers, he felt his heart seize up. Room 205. This was his worst class. Taught by Mrs. Reed, the strictest, most intimidating teacher in school. The classroom where Silas had lived his most embarrassing high school moment. On trembling legs, Silas walked through the doorway. The chatter ceased as 24 pairs of eyes fixed on him. Mrs. Reed's piercing glare cut through him. "You're late," she accused. "Well, don't just stand there. Take the last seat and open your textbook." Silas's face burned crimson as he shambled to the only open seat in the back row. Heads turned and giggles spread as he stumbled into the desk. This was his personal hell, forced to relive the most humiliating episodes of his teenage years. Door 6 opened onto a raucous college house party, privately hosted in an off-campus house. Silas immediately spotted her across the crowded living room. Sarah. His first love. The girl who had captured his heart, only to later break it. He longed to talk to her again, but she stood arm in arm with the jock she had left Silas for. Doors 7 and 8 continued the misery, plunging Silas back into scenes of betrayal by friends, pressures to conform, and the alienation of those awkward years between childhood and adulthood. Though these wounds should have healed with time, being forced to relive them tore those old scars wide open. Jaw set, Silas trekked onward, yearning for this cruel stroll down memory lane to end. As Silas emerged from door 8, thoroughly emotionally drained, he hesitated before approaching the next in the series. He needed a moment to collect himself after being forced to relive the most agonizing memories from his adolescent years. Wiping a shaking, sweaty palm down his face, Silas leaned against the curved stone wall of the circular chamber. He realized his trials here were becoming progressively more psychologically demanding. While the first doors had preyed on childhood fears, these last 4 had dredged up the anxiety and anguish of his teenage years. He knew it would only become harder from here. The clocks above the remaining doors marched ever higher into the hours. What traumas from his adult life might lie within? Failures, regrets, betrayals? His psyche had accumulated no shortage of scars since adolescence, but backing out wasn't an option. He still remembered the cryptic words of the note urging him onward. Confront your fears to find the way out. Compartmentalizing his emotions, Silas took a deep breath and continued to the door marked 9. He crossed the threshold with trepidation, bracing for whatever came next. Stepping through the door marked 9, Silas found himself standing at the front of a church, dressed in a tuxedo. He felt his stomach drop as he recognized the flowering archway and rows of expectant guests. This was the wedding he had fled years ago, leaving his bride-to-be waiting at the altar. Silas's palms began to sweat as he relived the panic that had overwhelmed him that day, causing him to bolt like a frightened animal. He saw the heartbreak and humiliation on her face again as he abandoned his vows and disappeared from her life. Though he had feared commitment then, he would give anything now for a second chance with the woman he had so cowardly jilted. The 10th door opened onto a family dinner, where a bitter argument erupted between Silas and his parents about his struggling media career. Years of creative differences and financial disputes boiled over as Silas stormed out, refusing to see or speak to them for years after. He watched his younger self unfairly berate his parents, who had only wanted the best for him. Pride and stubbornness had led to an estrangement he would come to regret. Door 11 forced Silas to revisit the day he walked out on his passion project, a novel he had been writing for years. After receiving the umpteenth publishing rejection letter, he allowed frustration to override persistence. In a fit of anger, he deleted the entire manuscript, abandoning his creative dreams entirely. He could still feel the pang of regret as he watched his digital life's work wiped out keystroke by keystroke, but nothing prepared him for Door 12. Here, Silas found himself in a dingy one-room apartment during the darkest period of his addiction. He had to witness himself, gaunt and hollow-eyed, increasingly neglecting work and relationships in favor of his all-consuming dependency. Even as he looked on in shame, his doppelganger shook out another cocktail of pills, slipping back into the void. It was like watching himself slowly commit suicide, powerless to intervene. Though each vision disturbed Silas to his core, they also reinforced an important truth. His actions had consequences, and he alone was responsible for the path his life had taken. He emerged from Door 12 determined to take accountability rather than dwelling in regret. There was nothing to do now, but keep moving forward. Silas's hand trembled as he reached for the cold metal handle of the unmarked door. The ominous portal stood apart from the others, its surface etched with strange symbols he could not decipher. Silas steeled himself for whatever lay beyond this final threshold. With great effort, he pulled the heavy door open. It grated against the stone floor with an awful screech, as if it had not been opened in eons. Peering inside, Silas saw nothing but a small, square room, empty except for a chair in its center. Though every instinct told him to turn back, Silas forced himself across the threshold. As soon as he entered, the door slammed shut behind him with an air of awful finality. The walls around him then seemed to vanish entirely, replaced with mirrors on all sides reflecting Silas's pale and frightened face back at himself. He gasped as he noticed the reflections were not perfect duplicates. In each mirror, Silas saw subtle differences, variations in his clothing, hairstyle, even his age and expression. These were not mere reflections, but rather snapshots of parallel lives he could have led had he made different choices at critical junctures. One mirror showed Silas in medical scrubs, having followed his childhood dreams of becoming a doctor. Another revealed a Silas in military fatigues, a route he had considered but ultimately avoided. He saw glimpses of the lives he could have had: husband, father, artist, poet, professor. If only he had seized opportunities he had passed over. In the mirrors, Silas also witnessed darker fates he narrowly avoided. A Silas addicted to alcohol, divorced and destitute. A Silas behind bars in an orange jumpsuit. Even a Silas lying pale and cold on a mortuary slab. Seeing the roads not taken forced Silas to confront how each small decision had shaped his present reality. He was suddenly aware of the tremendous power he held over his life path, if only he seized it. At the chamber's center, the elderly man from Silas's note materialized as if from thin air. As their eyes met, Silas sensed that this man was a version of himself from a distant future, a road ahead he could still realize. "I am you," the elder Silas spoke, "or one possibility of your future self, should you have the courage to confront your past and forge a new path." Silas digested his words. So this was purgatory, a realm between worlds to reconcile one's mistakes before moving forward, wherever that may lead in the afterlife. Silence fell as Elder Silas waited for the revelations to sink in. Finally, Silas nodded solemnly. He was ready. The mirrored walls and alternate selves dissolved until only the warm light of the future shone through. He had channeled his regrets into redemption. Whatever lay ahead, he would not look back. Silas stood alone as the blinding light dimmed to a warm glow. The mirrors and his alternate selves had vanished. All that remained was an open doorframe, beyond which Silas could see a lush green meadow bathed in sunshine. After an eternity trapped in the circle of doors and faced with the ghosts of his past, the idyllic vista seemed too good to be true. Silas approached the doorway cautiously, half expecting the beautiful scene to dissolve into yet another cruel illusion. Yet as he crossed the threshold, feeling the soft grass and warm sunlight envelop him, Silas knew in his heart this was no trick. The world around him felt realer than anything he had experienced since the accident. Silas gazed up at the cloudless blue sky, the breeze gently rustling the meadow flowers. He drew a deep breath, filling his lungs with sweet air. For the first time since this ordeal began, he felt at peace. It gradually dawned on Silas that his unearthly trials had come to an end. He had confronted the mistakes and regrets that anchored his soul to his past life. Now, he was being welcomed into whatever lay beyond. As he explored the meadow, Silas spotted a figure standing beneath a towering oak tree. It was the elder version of himself who had guided him in the mirrored room. The old man offered Silas a smile. "You have broken free of the shackles of your past," he said. "Now you are ready to take the next step in your journey, unburdened by regret." The elder Silas extended his hand. Silas clasped it without hesitation. Together, they walked toward a forest path that wound its way through the meadow towards strange new lands. Silas did not know where it led, but he feared no evil so long as he stayed on the righteous path. With his hard-won wisdom and acceptance, Silas now saw life as the gift it was meant to be. He had been granted the rarest second chance to live it right. As the last chains of purgatory fell away, Silas basked in limitless possibilities. Wherever his journey took him next, he would not look back nor squander a moment.